Hello and welcome to another episode of the Love of the Star podcast with the Super Bowl winning scout Brian Broaddus and myself, Eric Chiafalo of the G-Bag Nation. You can hear us 2 to 7 weekdays on the Cowboys flagship 105.3 The Fan. And the Love of the Star podcast is an Odyssey podcast, and you can find it on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcast. Broaddus, happy Wednesday, man. How are you?
I'm doing well, Eric. Thank you very much. We got the chance to visit with the Cowboy coaches, or at least heard for them. A lot of coach speak going on there, but it's nice to kind of get to see these guys. We're also working on an NFL draft, coming up here in 60 days or so. So a lot going on, free agency. So everybody needs to kind of stay tuned in to Love of the Star, because I think we'll have you covered on all avenues there.
No question about it. Yeah, this is a fun time of year, especially when you have a new coaching staff in place and you're trying to start connecting dots on what the plan is going to be, what the vision's going to be, and then what type of players are you going to want as it pertains to free agency and the draft. And they're just kind of laying out their plan right now. And I know for you as the scout man that you are, all the draft stuff and getting closer and closer to the combine, which will be going down next week in Indianapolis. So yeah, we'll be absolutely all over it. And I'd like to start right there, Broaddus, with some of the stuff that we heard from the new members of the Cowboys coaching staff. And I mean, I think that really ever since the intro presser with Schottenheimer and him laying out his vision for what he wants this team to be, and especially offensively, what he wants this team to look like. And then the way he went about filling his coaching staff, and we've talked about it plenty, of just his process, the way he's gone about it. Dak was very complimentary of the way Schottenheimer went through the coaching staff hiring process, where it was Schottenheimer really getting into the nuts and bolts of each interview and trying to figure out who is the best candidate for each position and who is aligned with sort of the vision that he has and the direction that he wants to take this team and especially this offense. So, I mean, that's all been hugely encouraging to this point. And then now you actually start to get to hear from guys like Clayton Adams and Matt Eberflus and start to get their vision. And I think the stuff that we heard from Clayton Adams yesterday, who comes from Arizona as their offensive line coach and is now going to be the offensive coordinator for the Cowboys. He won't be calling plays, but this is a guy with an extensive background coaching O-line, tight ends, run game coordinating, all these different things. And the common theme from him and the coaches yesterday was violence, aggressive, and physical and toughness. And let's start there. I think that's something that the Cowboys have needed for, gosh, man, they've needed that for a really long time.
Easier said than done. And it comes down to the ability to go and get the type of players that play that way. You can football players in general, because you play the game, it's a tough game, so the toughness aspect of it is, can you get that as coaches? Can you get that out of your players on a weekly basis? It is a tough game. Eric, you and I have played football ourselves. These guys play on a different level. It is a business. It is a job. But, you have to be a tough person to go out there and subject yourself to what it goes through in order to be successful. And so, now it's up to Matt Eberflus on the defensive side of the ball. You mentioned with Adams and what he's going to do on the offensive side of the ball. It's going to be that mindset. Do you talk this into existence? Do you will this into existence when it comes to how you want your team to be? And over the years, and I know you and I both have been very critical at times where this football team has not shown nearly enough toughness. Maybe the toughness to win the division, maybe the toughness to get into a second round game, but not the ability to have the mental toughness, the physical toughness in order to match up and complete the mission. So that is where, and the thing about Matt Eberflus, well, he's been here before, but when you talk about Brian Schottenheimer, he's kind of seen the faults and along the way. And maybe it's something that is in good, for this organization, that he kind of could see, or he saw what didn't work with Mike McCarthy, and now he's able to say, okay, if I was the head coach, this is what I would do differently. And I think he probably conveyed that message to Jerry and Stephen Jones when he went on this interview. Like, hey, I know what the issues are here right now. This is how I'm going to fix them. And you mentioned it, toughness. And so, I guarantee you that Brian Schottenheimer, much like his dad, heck, if he's half as tough as his dad, this guy will be an outstanding head coach. His dad was a very physical coach. He had a special teams background, defensive background, and so he had his teams. The offensive stuff, the running, the mentality of that was a very, very tough team. Everywhere he'd been, he had a tough team. So if he could take some of his father's beliefs and instill them not only in his coaching staff but into his team, he will be a successful head coach.
Yeah, and I mean, here's the direct quote from Cowboys' new offensive coordinator Clayton Adams. What does he want from his offensive line in particular? He says the same thing that I want from every player on offense, and that is to create violence in the game, be aggressive, run, hit. He says, I think that every decision that we make schematically needs to lean in that direction. And I think that was something where I think about the San Francisco games a lot over the last 5 years.
Me too.
Like, those are the games that really stick out to you. It doesn't matter if it's regular season. It doesn't matter if it's postseason. It doesn't matter if you're in San Francisco or if you're at AT&T Stadium. The Cowboys perpetually came out of those games feeling like, they didn't meet the moment when it comes to the toughness and physicality that the cream of the crop teams in the NFL play with. And so I think that's going to be absolutely huge, and it's encouraging to hear. And then the other one, and maybe the one that I really like the most from Clayton Adams, is he says, our job as coaches, he says, when we're putting things on the call sheet, it's to be problem solvers. We're trying to figure out what we do well and how we make that look multiple. How do we make that look different? That's the part I'm really looking forward to focusing on. And I think one thing you saw from the Cardinals offense that Clayton Adams just came from is they spread things out evenly in terms of the way they like to run the ball in particular. They weren't a one-trick pony that way, but he's talking about finding something, the things that you do well, and then how can you deploy the personnel and the alignments in different ways and show the defense different looks, even though it's still a bread and butter situation for you, the offense. It's the same play, but how many different variations of that can you have? And I think that's something that's lacked on the Cowboys coaching staff offensively in particular for a long time.
Yeah, and I could go back to the old, and before they were the Commanders, the Washington Redskins, and with Joe Gibbs. I can go all the way back to that era. And they had a play called counter tray where it involved pulling linemen, it involved pulling tight ends, it involved pulling players to put into position to block at the point of attack and try and get you with numbers. And they were really successful with the counter tray plays. You go through the last Super Bowl was in '91, when they beat the Buffalo Bills. But through the 80s, when they competed against the Tom Landry teams, when Joe Gibbs was there, it was all about counter tray. But what the Redskins at the time were able to do was counter tray was a staple play, but they ran it out of different looks. They ran it out of different formations. It was still the concept of the same play, but you had different ways of running it. And all of a sudden, and opponents really didn't have a really good plan for stopping it, because Joe Gibbs and his staff were getting into different types of settings, offensive sets, condensed splits. They were doing things differently, and they were coming up with more ways to make their staple play their best play. And that's really what coaching is. It is, can you find ways? This, the thing with Adams and the staff is they have got to take what they have right now. I don't know how many pieces they're going to be able to add along the offensive line. I don't know. They should add pieces at running back. We'll get into that in draft and free agency. They should be able to get pieces at wide receiver. The quarterback will be the same, but they need to develop that identity of plays that they can run. And you mentioned the way the Cardinals, under his leadership, they were able to run inside zone, outside zone, the pin and pull stuff. They were able to do it in a manner where, as if you tried to take that away from them, then they were able to lean on another area of their scheme in order to make that work. So that's going to be the trick going forward for these coaches. I'm sure they've sat down as a group, and Brian Schottenheimer, very familiar with this roster because he's worked here the longest, and so he has an idea. Now it's up to the rest of these coaches to come up to speed and sit there and determine, okay, we've got this for this particular scheme. We've got this for this particular scheme. So they've got to kind of figure that out, and then they've got to convey that message then to Will McClay and the scouting staff. It's like, listen, we're minus this piece, we're minus this piece, and we're minus this piece. It needs to be a goal of ours. If this is going to become a staple of our offense or our defense, we are going to have this type of player. So it's on the coaches to teach it. It's going to be on Will McClay and his guys in order to get the players, in order for them to run it the way they need. And it's probably not going to be perfect, Eric. They're probably not going to have all the pieces. And now that's where you have to be able to adapt to what you have until you currently say, if you add a player like Ashton Genty, the very talented running back from Boise, he can help you with your offensive line because his ability to make people miss. One of the best in the country in that. As you're developing your offensive line, Ashton Genty will be there to like, okay, if things aren't perfect, then you'll have that ability to kind of like, okay, we're going to grow. We're going to grow with Ashton Genty. He's going to help us hide some of the warts we might have. So that's kind of how you have to think. Not that they're going to go out and get Ashton Genty. They might go get another running back, but they're going to need pieces in place to help them get to the next level where they want to be.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things that I love about a guy like Clayton Adams, a guy like Connor Riley that they take out of the college ranks at K-State. I mean, these are guys that they've done more with less as it pertains to their players on the offensive line. K-State doesn't have a bunch of 5-star recruits, but they always have a good offensive line. Clayton Adams in Arizona with the Cardinals, they dealt, especially this last season, with a bunch of different injuries and moving parts on the offensive line, but they still were able to protect Kyler Murray at a high level and open up holes for James Conner in the run game, again, at a very high level. So these are guys that are used to, and I think it goes back to the teaching element. And that's what Clayton Adams was talking about, and Connor Riley, and you get the receivers coach to come in from college as well. And these are guys that when you're coaching in college, the teaching aspect of football is of extremely high importance. So I think all of those things are encouraging for the direction of this offense. Lunda Wells remains as the tight end coach. He was talking about physicality and violence. So seems like everybody's on the same page there. They're being problem solvers. They're trying to be teachers at a high level and get the most out of their guys. And of course, that's what being a great coach is. You're not always going to have the top talent, but how much can you get out of? Can you make an average player above average? Can you make a good player a great player? All those different things. And I'm encouraged offensively with the staff that they put together that they're going to be able to go ahead and achieve some of those goals. So yesterday was encouraging hearing from these coaches. Defensively, I don't know how optimistic you are when it comes to the Eberflus stuff. I'd be curious, but the way he's going to use Micah Parsons and just, sort of what his mindset is as a defensive coordinator, what type of defense he wants to have. And he wants to have an attacking defense. He says it's pretty simple. We take the ball away. That's what we do. We stop the run. We want to make exciting plays for our football team. That's really what we want to do. So, and Eberflus defenses have been pretty consistent with forcing turnovers over the years, being pretty solid at stopping the run. So all that stuff is well and good. But how him and Micah are able to connect and how he's able to get the most out of Micah. I think Mike Zimmer did a better job using Micah than even Dan Quinn did. And so I'm hoping that Eberflus can take some notes from what Zimmer did with Micah last year.
Yeah, I think that, the thing that you're going to get with Matt Eberflus, he looks very, as we would say, milquetoast, very plain, very just, they were asking him questions about experiences he had, with the Colts and with the Bears and how that, formed the things that he's done. But where I was encouraged was the stuff with immediately identifying Micah Parsons as his best player. He immediately said, we've got to figure out ways, to get him, whether it's on the ball. He talked about him as a rusher, He said one of the best pass rushers in the National Football League. So to me, that tells me that the thought initially is going to be about how can we continue to allow Micah Parsons to throw? How can we, as you like to say, how do we free up those opportunities, the free rushers, where he's not getting blocked at all? Where's the creativity in the twist game, the stunts, the movement, the things that where do you place him? How do you stress blocking schemes out with other personnel in order to allow Micah Parsons to thrive? And so Eberflus didn't tell us a whole lot yesterday. And he did mention, though, like I said, ears perked up when the acknowledgement of Micah Parsons as being one of the best pass rushers. My hope is that that Matt Eberflus doesn't, and his staff doesn't just say, okay, Micah, roll the ball out there and here we go. I do want to see, Mike Zimmer did have creativity, as you mentioned, the mug blitzes where they walk linebackers up into the gaps. It affected blocking schemes. Heck, we saw Jaden Daniels for 2 games against the Commanders look like a mortal rookie quarterback when he played against Mike Zimmer with the looks that he was able to get. Everybody else, he was a rookie of the year candidate and rookie of the year player and potential MVP type of player. But against Mike Zimmer, he looked like a mortal player. And so to me, this is where this is all going to hinge, is how are you able to get, Micah Parsons going? Now, this defense, I think it's going to be a bit of a struggle because I think they're going to lose a lot of the depth that they built the last 2 years. We saw last year what it had happened. They lost guys to the Commanders, the guys around the league, and now I think we're about to have some players that you've clearly developed. Oso Digizua, Golston, Lewis, guys like that, potentially not being here no longer. And so can you replace those guys? Are the guys you've drafted the last couple of years ready to step up and take on a larger role, much like what happened in Philadelphia? If you look at, Howie Roseman and the draft he had with the Eagles, those Georgia kids, for a while there, the Georgia kids weren't playing like the Georgia kids we'd seen before in national championship teams. It all came together for them last year. Those kids started playing better. It took them a couple of years, but they got that going. And hopefully, Matt Eberflus can benefit from some of the picks that they've made before. But defense is going to have to be a little bit of a focus on it this year as well.
Couldn't agree more, and that's the perfect transition here as we take a look at some of the draft and free agent, just some general strategy ideas that I'd like to discuss with you right here on the Love of the Star podcast, which is an Odyssey podcast. You can find it on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. And Broadus, we've seen so much conversation about the Cowboys trying to maybe add some more guys on the offensive line. Certainly the running back conversation has huge. Who's going to be wide receiver 2 to CeeDee Lamb? The playmakers, where are we getting the excitement offensively? But man, when I look at this defense and I look with what Matt Eberflus has to work with, and the prospects of losing those guys that you just mentioned in Osa and Golston and Lewis, man, to me, I'm thinking this needs to be. It's a trenches situation for sure, especially when it comes to the defensive tackle spot. I think that's glaring. But who's your opposite edge rusher to Micah Parsons? Hopefully Sam Williams comes back off the ACL clean and ready to rock, but that's a huge question. And to me, the biggest one that people are not talking about enough is the need for corners and just defensive backs. Like to me, if it was in maybe a perfect world, and you never know what happens in free agency, and there's a part of me, like more so than ever this time around, with how deep the defensive tackle class is in the draft, but then you have the OTA question. Man, if we could, I wish we could look into the future and see how the draft's going to play out. Most all leagues go draft and then free agency. The NFL does it backwards, and this is one where you're like, man, I wish we could foresee what's going to happen in the draft, so then I could really make a firm decision on, do I even need to re-sign Osa here and give him all that money when the draft is filled with stud defensive tackles? But if you asked me, man, I think getting a top flight corner and getting 2 studs in the middle of your defensive line, 1 and 3 technique. If you told me that was your first 3 rounds, if you told me it was a Jahdae Barron and then a Derek Harmon and then an Alfred Collins or something like that,
Sure,
I think that
sure.
would be a home run. I think the secondary conversation needs to be louder, and I don't think people are talking about it enough.
No, I totally agree, Eric. And one of the questions we're going to get into with the Dean Julia mailbag is uh, they one of the listeners asked if you could draft all defensive players in the first 3 rounds, who would you get? And if you would your team be better off drafting 3 offensive players or drafting 3 defensive players? And so that's where you got to kind of think about. I took the approach of, hey, I think I was going to take these defensive guys. And if you listen to the names, and I actually included a cornerback into the mix is what I did. So I totally agree with you. There are huge questions, right? If Carson had played better in the secondary for the Cowboys last year, if say he played, all the games and he was getting better, I'm not saying that he was coming in and being an all rookie or something like that. I mean, he's a capable player. And I thought coming out of camp, when he was selected, that like, okay, this kid is going to step in. He's going to play well on the outside, and it's going to allow them to move Bland to the inside when he's ready to go. And, if you want to move on from Jordan Lewis, that kind of thing. Jordan Lewis played really well. But people are not talking nearly enough about the situation with Diggs. They're just not. And you're potentially – Diggs is – and I'm going to be real honest here with you folks. Diggs's rehab wasn't perfect last year. It wasn't perfect, and there has to be a sense of urgency there. There has to be that willingness to every day come in there and work with Britt Brown and sacrifice and do everything possible to make your rehab as well as it needs to be. And so, yeah, you've got some injury questions now at corner. Bland he came back, looked fine. You're likely going to lose Lewis unless something happens that, you can get him to resign. I mean, he's not on a lot of these top 75, best free agent lists, which I think is a gross misevaluation. But maybe the Cowboys catch a break there. But I think you're absolutely right. I think you have to look at the safety position. You got to look at the corner position. You got to look at the nickel position. This is not nearly talked about enough, and I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Just when you start stacking up, and I know you guys talked about this on Cowboys.com and the draft show, just like if you really look at position groups and where do you have enough bodies to say, like, we could play a game today here? And you guys pointed out the offensive line. That is a group where, yes, you'd like to have upgrades, and hopefully there's some growth with this new coaching staff, with your young guys, especially guys like Tyler Guyton, of course. Hopefully Terrence Steele can turn back the clock a little bit to a couple of years ago, and everybody can take some steps forward, BB included. And then who do you replace Zach Martin with at right guard? And it's not necessarily great home run options when you think about a Hoffman or a Bass or something, but those are at least guys that are serviceable, that can play if you had to play tomorrow. And I think there's a similar deal with the wide receiver position. You traded for Mingo. Nobody liked it, but they did it. You have them. You still have Tolbert. Hopefully they end up retaining Kavontae Turpin, and you have bodies there. But running back, certainly, if Dowdle's going to walk out the door, that's a glaring spot that you need to fill. But I think mostly the spots that are like blinking red lights are linebacker, defensive tackle, opposite edge rusher to Micah Parsons, and then all these corners that you're dealing with. So to me, like, the defensive reinforcement here has to be number one on the priority list. And it feels like this draft, outside of linebacker, which fortunately the free agent class of linebackers, if you want to throw a little money around, hopefully they can get a guy, but defensive tackle and some corners and DBs, seems like there's some guys in the draft that could fill those spots.
Yeah, no, there absolutely is. And that's the one thing you've hit the nail completely on the head. Dallas has so many needs. This team is, in a way, talent poor in some positions. And they've been waiting on guys to step up. When you said the name Tolbert, immediately I thought, man, how many years have we been waiting for Tolbert to step up? And we saw flashes, and me, I hate flash players. I like consistency. I like guys that are growing each week. I don't like guys that play great against the Giants in week 2 and you don't see them again till week 6 against the Eagles. I don't think that's a good way to operate right there. So yeah, I think that they probably are most comfortable, and I say most comfortable with this thought in mind, with their offensive line. They probably feel like they have enough bodies that they saw play last year. Now, you're going to probably, like I say, with new coaches in, with the situation with Adams and Riley, they're going to look at this offensive line and say, wait a minute, we can't play with Awesome Richards. We can't play with Brock Hoffman. We can't play with TJ Bass. But you know what? This first year, they might be forced to kind of make that work. Maybe they add a piece here and there. We've talked about the potential of adding an offensive lineman at 12, depending on what guy that is, and then maybe shuffling some things around. But this is a huge year, in my opinion, for Tyler Guyton. And I need Coach Riley. I need Coach Adams. I need those guys. And they've already talked about, they've had conversations with him. They need to get him on the page with everybody else. They need to work on maturity. They need to work on the things that make you a good pro. And, I think if you cut back on the penalties that he had, I think there were a lot of times the injuries that he had to miss time on. I think that those are the things that you have to kind of look at, and you have to say to yourself, did he miss too much time? Did they just give up on him? You worry about those things. If I were to ask him a question, I'm like, did you feel like they gave up on you last year? He might be a player that needs to be coddled a little bit. And you know what? Here we're talking about toughness and all that, but sometimes you do have to put your arm around. We saw what Jeff Sagina did with Mozzie Smith. Nobody could get Mozzie Smith to play better, but that crew last year got him to play better. And maybe it's the fact that they put their arm around him and said, hey, listen, we're going to have to do it this way. If you don't do it this way, then, we're all going to be gone. So here's Mozzie Smith, whole new coaching staff again. Here's Guyton, having to pick things up. But they need their young players to step up, much like I mentioned with the Philadelphia Eagles and how their guys stepped up, those young players that they drafted and thought a lot of.
Yeah, no question about it. Okay, before we get to the mailbag, I did want to ask you about a particular player because we're starting to see a lot of connections to a guy in these mock drafts that the Cowboys might be interested in round 1. It's the defensive tackle Walter Nolen out of Ole Miss. He's starting to pop up a little bit. So just give me your thoughts on him, and where would you be comfortable with the Cowboys taking him?
Yeah, at 12, that would not be on my book. But okay, here's where you have to pay attention now. And Eric, as you well know, you and I have been working together a long time now. They don't care what you and I think. We have opinions, and and we evaluate and we look and we think and this, that, the other. They don't care what. The last time they cared about what I thought was in 2005. That was a long time ago. So, but when I look at Walter Nolen, there are some really good traits about the player. There's some, you look at his size, you look at his ability to play with some quickness, you look at his ability to play across the line of scrimmage. He just doesn't do it consistently enough. He transferred from Texas A&M. He kind of talked to some folks around college football about him, and they'll say, listen, this guy's a super talented guy, but he always doesn't play like a super talented player. Is there some factor of some laziness to his game? Again, I said it earlier, this is a tough game. You're tough-minded to have to play this game. But this guy has got all the talent in the world. He just doesn't play like he has all the talent in the world at times. Ole Miss has a rotating system. They get guys in and out. You really have to pay attention when he's in there, when he's out. But there's times where he will come in and make some nice plays for you. So that's the thing about it. Is 12 rich for me? Yes. 44, more comfortable. I kind of feel like he is a second-round player. Now, I'm going to end up with probably 13 to 14 first-round grades. Where does that put him now? I'm looking at all second-round players right now on my stack. So, you could be well inside the line. I think the Cowboys scouts, I think there is a genuine interest in Walter Nolen at 12 for them. And I say that only because you and I did work on 105.3 The Fan on the G-Bag Nation yesterday talking about Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft. And the one thing that I know about Daniel Jeremiah is he's a former NFL scout. He's with the Philadelphia Eagles, who's with the Baltimore Ravens. He has friends in the league, general manager friends, scout friends, player personnel friends, the directors. All these people would like to talk to Daniel Jeremiah. He's really good at his job, and he gets a lot of good information. His second mock draft, he put Walter Nolen there. He could have put Ted McMillan. He could have, he put Genty the first time around. I think there was a message here. I mean, I think he was probably talking to somebody in the Dallas Cowboys organization, and they're telling him, hey, keep an eye on Walter Nolen. Keep an eye on this player from Ole Miss. We're going to maybe take a look at Walter Nolen. The fact that he mocked Walter Nolen to Dallas at 12 sent me a message. It sent me a big message because there are plenty other players that Dallas could have used. And you and I went down the list, and I got my piece of paper right here to say it. Ted McMillan, the wide receiver from Arizona State, would have been a great fit. Omarion Hampton, okay, he's the running back from North Carolina. Henderson, we've talked about. Ibuka from Ohio State, we've talked about. Matthew Golden, the wide receiver, we talked about. He put that player, that Mississippi tackle, above all those guys. And he's trying to make the best mock drafts he can make and be the most accurate he can make. I would keep an eye on that one if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan. Again, there's some really good play from him. He's a very polarizing player, and there's several polarizing players, in my opinion, in this draft.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get to the mailbag here on the Love of the Star podcast, which is an Odyssey podcast. You can find us on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. Broadus, I know you're loaded up with mailbag questions. We love our listeners, and they always bring it strong.
Yeah, they sure do, Eric. And let me pull up my list here, and I do appreciate everybody that answered the call to questions. So let me get my list here. We've got some really, really good ones that we can surely bounce through here. And let's see what we got here. Okay, the first question is, Eric, and this one's coming from Matt Holleran, and Matt wants to know, and you can help me along with this one. What duo of a pending free agents would you like to pick and retain, and why? Okay, I'm going to give you the pairings, and you tell me yes or no on this, if who you'd like or not.
Okay.
Lewis and Kendricks, Lawrence and Cooks, Dowdle and Golston, Osa Odigizua and Turpin, who's the restricted free agent. You need me to repeat them, or are you good?
No, that's good.
Which duo would you like to keep of that group, if you could?
Yeah, I mean, Osa and Turpin jump out for sure, but I think in terms of bang for your buck, I would probably go with the Lewis and Kendricks factor, and keep some veteran leadership defensively there. Not many linebackers in the draft class. And the nickel corner spot is one of the more difficult spots in all of football to have a stud. And Jordan Lewis may be off his best season. I don't think he's going to break the bank. Kendricks, of course, wouldn't either. I don't think Kendricks is overly likely now that Zimmer is gone. I think that's probably not something that will happen. But given the question, I'd go Lewis and Kendricks. Yeah,
I think to me that that one makes a lot of sense. I do think the combination, like you say, the one you're right that's probably going to break the bank would be Osa Odigizua. And the Turpin combination, to me, would probably be the one that helps your defense and offense the most. The Lawrence Cooks one seems like it's very much a maybe past their prime kind of guys. I think I would move on from those two. But I said Lawrence and Cooks, right? I didn't say Lewis. I meant Lawrence and Cooks past the prime. The Lewis Kendricks one is interesting just because I felt like at the end Kendricks was kind of wearing down. Lewis was a hell of a player for you the whole year. So, I think they're all interesting combinations. If the numbers worked on the Osa Odigizua one, I would surely pick that one if I could. But that's gonna be way too expensive for this football team.
Yeah, agreed. And I will say, if the money was the same, I would, if you changed out Osa for the Eagles guy, Milton Williams.
There you go. Yeah.
I would, for me personally, I just like that player better. I think he's a better run defender, and I think he's ascending as a pass rusher. And he played his best football this season, especially in the biggest moments, NFC Championship, Super Bowl. So if it was Milton Williams and Turpin in this scenario, that would be the one that I would go for. I'd be willing to spend the money on Milton Williams more so than Osa.
There you go. I like what you're doing there. as I would like to spend the money on Nick Bolton instead of maybe Kendricks or somebody like that.
Sure.
All right. This comes from Tyler G. And this goes back to what I teased earlier with you about. Tyler G asked, he said, you have a chance between selecting all offensive players or all defensive players in the first 3 rounds. What would your picks be and why? Okay, here's the groups that I did with, if I could, Eric.
Yes.
I went with offensive players. I went with Genty, Jackson, the guard or tackle from Ohio State at 44, and I went with Royals, the wide receiver from Utah State, in the 3rd. That was my offensive pairing that I picked.
Okay.
My defensive pairing I picked was Green, the edge rusher from Marshall. I went Williams, the defensive tackle at 44 from Ohio State, and I went Harrison, the corner from Kentucky. And this is a very interesting exercise for me because I could justify both groups. I took the time to really pick these guys. If you think about, you get a runner, a guard, a wide receiver. All of them fit when you look at Genty's important because of what we talked about earlier with the ability to make this offensive line better. Jackson would help you as a plug and play player, I believe. I watched him, and we've all watched him. He was the left guard at Ohio State. They had to kick him to left tackle when Josh Simmons got hurt against Oregon, and he played at a very high level. Very reminiscent of what we've seen Tyler Smith do before for the Cowboys. Play guard at a high level, go play tackle, and play at a nice level. So to me, and then Royals is kind of a big body or a bigger body, not a 6'3" type of guy, but a bigger body that can play X, opposite of where CD, you can move CD around, but Royals is a tough, catch the ball inside, run after catch guy, maybe not the most explosive when it comes to running, but the routes are really, really good. The hands are outstanding. He's a bona fide player that you play in those tough situations, big body guy, make tough catches, be reliable on 3rd down when you need him on those routes. So that's why I look at that offense. But if I look at Green, now Green from Marshall as a pass rusher is outstanding. And what's happened in this draft, he's just consistently moved up. And the Saints in the Daniel Jeremiah mock draft picked him at 9. And so he's been a guy that's constantly stepped up. Every time there's been one of these mock drafts, you've seen this guy, he's gone from, say, like in the 20s, now he's at 15, now he's at 9. We've seen these types of players move up in the draft, and he's outstanding. So he could play opposite Micah Parsons and be really, really, really good for you. So I like him. Williams, a defensive tackle, could play as a 320-pound defensive tackle. You could play him as a 1. You could play him as a 3. He takes on blocks. There's so many positive things about him. He plays outside the tackle box. He could give you some pass rush. Harrison, the corner from Kentucky, got really good size to him. Now, what's interesting about him is, really good size is he's not a short corner. He's got good size. He's got good weight. I think his kid could be a really good nickel. And if you lose Jordan Lewis, this is a kid I think you could plug in and play as a nickel. Plays well on the outside. He's plays sometimes in the slot for the Wildcats. You could use some flexibility, press man, off man, all that kind of stuff. This kid, he drives on the football. So this was a really difficult exercise for me because I think both groups really, really helped the team. If I had to go, and then listening to you talk, I think you would go for all the defensive guys because you had questions at corner, you had questions at defensive tackle, and you had questions at like what's going to happen opposite Micah Parsons. But all these kids on the offensive side, Genty is a top 3 player on a lot of people's boards. Jackson, the guard, has done nothing but elevate his game throughout the season and into the playoffs. He's shown flexibility. And Royals, as I mentioned, if you haven't seen him play at Utah State, just go onto YouTube and watch some of his highlights. You'll get a feel for how good the player really is. So I kind of have a feeling that you liked my defensive guys better than you liked my offensive guys.
I think so. I think just the general need factor, and I love the idea of the premium edge rusher position in round one, and then a guy in the middle of the defensive line in round two, and then you mentioned the nickel corner. I mean, but you painted a beautiful picture on both sides because I mean, Genty, I don't value the running back as much, but he's no question a plug and play and probably immediate top 5 running back in the NFL from day one. And then the offensive lineman you just talked about, I mean, it feels like Clayton Adams and Connor Riley, they really love versatile guys who can do a little bit of everything in terms of position flexibility. So you paint that picture beautifully, and then you get a big body X receiver opposite CeeDee Lamb. So, I mean, I think you hit both out the park here, but just general need, I think, and the holes that you have defensively right now, I think that supersedes the excitement that you just painted offensively.
All right, Eric, the final question here in the last couple of minutes that we have. Jordan H. wants to know, do you guys, and we touched on this maybe a little bit, do you guys believe Micah Parsons will be used creatively in this new defense? Is there a blueprint available, and will it happen? Do you feel like that these coaches will use Micah Parsons in a way that we believe he needs to be used?
I don't know if it will be as good of a deployment as Mike Zimmer was able to do. I mean, Zimmer has the more aggressive style background. It wasn't like, oh wow, this is the first time I'm experiencing having a guy to this type of level on my defense. You've seen Zimmer over the years be that guy. Whatever defense he's in, he's getting the most out of, especially the guys that get after the pass and setting them up for success in a big way. And the amount of unblocked pressures that he was able to create for Micah Parsons last year was really, really impressive. I don't know that you're going to see the same from Eberflus. He's a little bit more bend but don't break. I don't think he's Mr. Aggressive, Mr. Blitz. So I think he's kind of like, hey, this is how we play. We want to play sound. We want to get takeaways, but I don't think he's Mr. Creative and going to use Micah the same way that Zimmer did. So I'm less optimistic about that, but hopefully I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. Thank you to all the folks that asked us questions, and thank you. They're all very, very good. And maybe I'll go back on Twitter, the ones that didn't get answered today, and try and knock those out for the folks. But we really do appreciate you guys listening to Love a Star and interacting with us that way.
Absolutely. Amen to that. Thank you to everyone who asked some questions, and we'll follow up. We'll have another episode coming up later this week, and we can circle back on some of the questions we did not get to. Brian Broaddus, the Super Bowl winning scout. You're a super beast. Thanks so much, my friend, and we'll be back later this week.